unfortunately, the Chinese Communist Party is kind of kicking our butts. We're going to get into a story about how China is working to decouple with the U.S., which could have devastating consequences for the United States. But first, since this is an ideological battle, and I don't think a lot of people really understand this, I think we should take a look at how the Chinese Communist Party celebrated its 100th birthday. I mean, have you seen some of those, the celebration they did? It was extreme cult-like behavior.
Yeah, well, the Chinese Communist Party is basically the world's most powerful cult.
It's a good way to put it.
I mean, look, they are a cult. They force you to believe their ideology. It's very difficult to leave. Once you become a member, you have to pledge your life to the flag, essentially. You have to pledge yourself to the party. You also have to pay some amount of membership dues. So they're taking your money. They have a possibly charismatic leader that you have to follow. You can't stray ideologically or they punish you. They have their own system of punishment, the shuanggui, which they do to party members, which is outside the normal legal system. Just like, and then, of course, all of the other things that they do to people. But like, those are pretty cult-like things, not to mention those creepy photos from July 1st.
Yeah, but I don't think that, like I don't really like using the word cult for this because I think that just an exaggeration of what people experience on the ground in a lot of ways in terms of joining the Communist Party, because for most people, they think of it as basically when Jack Posobiec was on last week, we talked about how it was like the 1% of China, the party members. So they see it as a way of just getting up in the world. Like if you want to get a raise or a promotion at your company, you have to join the party. Or maybe if you want to get into a good, PhD program, you should join the party.
I think this is really key to kind of what I was saying at the beginning about how this is an ideological war with the U.S. For many years, the Chinese Communist Party had to, in a way, play nice to lure in Western democracies to work with it, especially in the years after the Tiananmen Square massacre. There was a lot of suspicion.
I just think that this is how most people kind of experience it. So they have to pay dues, but a lot of people just don't pay dues anymore. And then the Communist Party doesn't count them as having left the party. So
it's a party you can never leave.
But they essentially are not really part of it. Or, for example, But
they have pledged to live and die for the party. Like that pledge doesn't just go away.
So, okay, like I get where you're coming from. And I think the other thing that's sort of in favor of your argument is that the word cult is an ill-defined term. And it's mainly used as like a kind of general description of something that you don't like. So I get that. And yeah, there's like a, sliding scale of what's a cult versus what's a religion. Certainly you would agree, Shelley, that the Chinese Communist Party essentially has created a religion, right?
I mean, they've basically they supplanted religions in China, essentially.
Right, but the Communist Party has its own ideological system of beliefs, right?
Yeah, and I think they've used increasingly religious language. This is kind of the point I was trying to make about the cult thing, that even from after Mao died and up until, the last few years, people joined the party because of just kind of like a personal interest type of thing, not because they thought that they really believed in communism, etc. It's like you joined something thinking it wasn't for real, but now it's for real. Do you know what I mean? Now it's kind of taking on the religious, or, when Xi Jinping says that you have to go to on a pilgrimage to Yan'an, where the party, had its base for many years, and it's a spiritual experience, or, they're kind of increasingly using that, or when you have increasing things like churches in China having to put up pictures of Mao and Xi Jinping, so it's kind of, I would say it's moving increasingly in that direction, but I think a lot of people wouldn't have experienced it that way up until very recently.
So is it more like the Mao Zedong days now than it was under, say, Deng Xiaoping or Jiang Zemin?
I think the party's always been there, but people didn't really take it seriously for a long time in terms of, you had to go to take your Marxist-Leninist class. at school, right? And everybody just did it. But nobody really thought that this is something we have to take seriously. But now, Xi Jinping has been very clear that what he doesn't want to do is become Gorbachev. Like, he's not really willing to put the party's power at risk.
You're saying Xi Jinping essentially now wants ideological purity among party members.
He's bringing the ideology back to the forefront in a way that it hasn't been.
I think this is really key to kind of what I was saying at the beginning about how this is an ideological war with the U.S. For many years, the Chinese Communist Party had to, in a way, play nice to lure in Western democracies to work with it, especially in the years after the Tiananmen Square massacre. There was a lot of suspicion about what kind of regime it was. But now what we've seen is the party has gained so much power and influence and feels like they can do anything and Wall Street will be on their side. We've seen now that they can kind of show their true face, which is what the party has always been.
It's interesting that the party tries to both claim, we've been around for 100 years, look at how great we are, and at the same time just try to ignore all the things like the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution. It's like we are the same party, but also we didn't do any of those things.
And also not a whole lot of mention of how it was actually started by agents from the Soviet Union.
Oh, well, because Mao
third
purged
commentary.
those people way back in the, during the Yan'an rectification.
Right. I mean, no mention of essentially the Chinese Communist Party being a foreign, like having a foreign origin, right? I mean, it's essentially Marxist-Leninist, which is itself Western and foreign, but also it was the Soviet Union's third Comintern that, came to China through its Far East Bureau and attempted to start the Chinese version of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which then Mao, he kind of like took that to be his own thing and purged the Soviets eventually. But like that's the origin of the party, which is not really something they want to talk about.
I mean, that's the beauty of socialism with Chinese characteristics, is that they can kind of claim the legacy of, this Marxist party, but also claim the legacy of China and the 5,000 years of history, which they, of course, tried to destroy many times under their 100 years of existence. But let's forget about that part, So it's like they want to be both this powerful party that's lasted for 100 years, but they also want to claim that they're not the same party that they were in the 50s and the 60s, in the 80s, even though they have never, repudiated any of those things that they've done.
Well, it's not even so much that they're claiming they're not that party anymore. It's just any of the bad things that happened back then, that didn't happen. So it's always been the same great party leading China to a new future, protecting the Chinese people from the Westerners who want to enslave the Chinese people. And that was a point Xi Jinping made in his big speech at the 100-year anniversary. He was saying anyone who wants to oppress or enslave China will have their heads bloodied, something like that.
I don't think it
Smashed
was
against
even
the Great Wall of Steel forged by 1.4 billion Chinese people.
Beautiful word.
flesh and blood.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because he's using like the language of like, obviously anyone who's trying to enslave China, like that's not good. That's not really what he's talking about. He's talking about this ideological war with the United States. And that encompasses things like U.S. boycotts of Xinjiang cotton because Xinjiang cotton is made with ethnic slave labor.
Yeah, I mean, I think it wasn't just about enslaving Chinese people, because
He said like oppress, enslave,
it was
Bully.
bully.
So the bully part, I think, is important because, a lot of countries talk about, we won't be slaves or whatever. But the bully part is the type of propaganda that the Chinese Communist Party uses to basically claim that anytime anybody stands up to them or rejects something that they want to do, that is bullying China, right?
And this ties into what you were saying about like the patriotic education that happened after the Tiananmen Square massacre. Now, you said that, the young people going to these Marxist-Leninist class, they don't really believe in communism. They don't really believe in the party. But that is not That was not the focus of that. That was to implant this kind of ideology that you're talking about, where they are primed to be triggered by that language. Oh yeah, we don't want to be bullied by foreign powers. The Communist Party is there to defend us from these Western bullies. So even though they might not be, waving around the little Maoist red books, they still have been implanted with this communist ideology that can be triggered very easily.
I mean, that was the point of the patriotic education and the whole turn towards socialism with Chinese characteristics, because once they started becoming, everything was different from other Marxist-Leninist states, and the collapse of the Soviet Union meant that the collapse of communism in most of the world meant that they couldn't really draw on that strength anymore, so they had to kind of change it to be something else that they could. It's kind of like what North Korea did with Juche in a way.
Yeah.
Where they took Marxist-Leninist thought and then were like, okay, we're not Marxist-Leninist anymore. Now we're self reliant. Is that the like? It's not self-reliant. It's something similar to that.
But their Juche system is essentially a Marxist-Leninist communist ideology with like a little bit of rebranding, with a few things borrowed from the Christian Bible to prop up Kim Il-sung and how he poops rainbows or whatever. And then
I think the thing is he doesn't
poop.
Yeah.
But there were rainbows when he was born, something like this.
We're getting some of the details of Juche ideology mixed up here.
Well, but anyway, the point is that they just call it a different thing, and then it's their own thing.
Well, this ties back into postmodernism in general, which is kind of a lot of where communism is coming from. There are no actual hard and fast definitions to things. Things can be whatever you want them to be, and that's been very effective in how, I know you've talked about this a lot, Shelley, how the Chinese Communist Party can manipulate language to be whatever it wants, to serve whatever needs it has.
Right, so I call myself a nice guy, and I can define nice however I want.
Exactly.